I grew up in the eastern part of North Carolina in a little small farm community called Kenley or Beulah Township. And back in those days, the farmers all drove to town on Saturday with their mules and wagons and to pick up their staples and that sort of thing that they needed to survive until the next trip they made to town. That area was known as the tobacco and cotton industry of the Southeast. That meant it had a lot of cotton fields and a lot of tobacco fields. I wasn't very good at either one of them. And I went in the field one day pulling a burlap bag and a strap. Not a big guy, but just worked extremely hard in my opinion. And my goal was to pick 100 pounds of cotton. So when I weighed out that afternoon, I had under 70 pounds. And I said, then, Lord, if you just let me find something else to do, I have picked my last bowl of cotton. And I wasn't too happy with born in tobacco either, because it was a very dirty work, and second, normally hot and very boring. So being a young guy and seeing a lot of movies involving soldiers and this kind of thing, I decided that I was going to try to get into the Army. And I did, and I won't tell you my age, but I'm not going to explain it in any more detail. You just have to figure it from there. Anyway, that day after weighing out, I made a decision that I was going in the Army. And at age 15, I entered the military Army, took basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And following that, I was assigned overseas to Japan, a little town south of Tokyo and Yokohama called Yokosuka Naval Base. We were outside of that area, Camp McGill. And being a young guy and gung-ho, I kept my shoes more than polished and that sort of thing, and began to think that's all there was to it. Took training, and that sort of thing. And then one day, someone asked me, said, did you hear about Korea? Well, I was the smartest guy in the world, and I'm still not. But I said, no, do you eat that with bread or something? But anyway, he explained that North Korea had invaded South Korea. But trust me, and I've told JW this, about 3 weeks later, 2 to 3 weeks later, I knew exactly what it was. And at that time, I celebrated my 16th birthday in Japan. And we boarded ship in Yokosuka, troop transport, and we made an amphibious landing in a place called Daejeon, South Korea. And that was my first exposure to combat, and believe it or not, the first day I was ready to go home, but the commitment was there, so I stayed in there with it. And I was experienced 2 seasonal turnovers there, the hottest time of the year and the coldest time of the year. As a matter of fact, I believe that my unit did take Pyongyang, North Korea, the first time it was taken, and the temperature, I think that day was about 30 below zero, or somewhere well below zero. It's very cold anyway. You can rest assured that's a fact. And I made several trips north and south. I probably crossed the 38th parallel 3 or 4 times, or at least twice or 3 times. And I ended up back in what at that time was referred to as the Pusan Perimeter. And that meant that we only held a little foothold in Korea, South Korea. And my position, last position of holding, was on the Nakton River. And you could see everything visibly that was going on from where I was sitting or where I was located. And it was quite an experience for me, especially all those trips. And I, along with most other people, thought we were going home because we couldn't pull back any further because we were already on the Pusan Perimeter. And long story short, General MacArthur came up with the idea to make an Incheon landing in North Korea, and when he did so, we jumped off on an assault, mobile, and every obstacle you run into, you'd stop, call in for support to eliminate the obstacle, and we ended up in probably 2 or 3 weeks or a month or two later, we ended up in Pyongyang. And I was so excited about that because I thought that would be it for us too. I don't know where I said it or not, but at that time I was 16 years old, and had opportunity to see a lot of activity, primarily involving our own troops, and particularly a high number of North Koreans and Chinese later. But basically the South Korean Army was annihilated by the U.S. Army and Marines and other people that were involved in it. And this went on for the entire time I was there. And we didn't go home. We jumped off in Pyongyang and made a last movement to make a line of communications with 187 Airborne Regiment, and who had jumped to rescue some POWs. And when they jumped and they saw them, and they were mostly all South Korean POWs, and they killed them all of them that were in the boxcars, freight cars, loaded. And we received briefings on what we could do and what we couldn't do at the Yellow River, which is borderline between Korea and South Korea, North Korea and China. And I was over there when the Chinese brought something like 2 million troops down north of the Yellow River on the Chinese side of the Yellow River. And they came across with the stipulation that they were protecting the Joseon Reservoir, which gave them as good a reason as any, but a tremendous number of people. And we had several groups that were overran in vast volumes, and machine guns, you couldn't shoot them fast enough because they'd keep coming. And we were informed that they had something like 10 or 11 people in a squad, and one rifle per that squad. As the first guy dropped it, then the next guy picked it up, and that sort of thing. But they just had a mass of people, and it made it very difficult to. You almost had to withdraw. You didn't have any choice. When your guns wouldn't fire, that sort of thing. So we just rolled the punches on that. And I ended up remaining in Korea until May of 1951. And when I entered Korea, it was in June of 1950. And what a mess I got involved in. But made a lot of friends, knew a lot of buddies and that sort of thing, and had a successful trip in and out.
And how long a period of time were you in Korea?
About a year, 11 months to 12 months, yeah.
And was the mission accomplished? Was when you all went and left, had you accomplished what you set out to accomplish?
Not really, because the negotiations were in effect at that time in Panmunjom, and made very little headway at all on that because they were very difficult people to deal with. The North Koreans too, but basically there was no North Korean army to amount to anything left. And we were blessed that we had air superiority, because the one most frightening thing that I had the most fear of was napalm. Mm-hmm. And that's a very large explosive gel of gasoline and that sort of stuff. And it's I was just so thankful every time I saw it that they weren't using it against us. Mm-hmm. And I had to make a lot of decisions that normally a person my age would not have to make over there. Some of them were good and some of them were bad. But,
you were in combat at 16.
Yeah.
Then you finished, when you finished that 1 year, where did you go after that?
Well, I returned to the United States and was stationed at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And every day while I was there, at about 5 o'clock, I'd get so tired, fatigued, and sweaty that I'd go and lay down in my bunk, and several times I didn't wake up until the next morning. And finally, after suffering a little bit, I went to visit my brother over at Augusta, and on the day I was going back, I just told him I couldn't make it. So I went out to the hospital at Fort Gordon at that time and had malarial fever. Just as soon as he saw me, they knew exactly what it was. I'd been treated by civilian doctors for intestinal flu and that kind of stuff, but it was really malarial fever. And I was very fortunate because that's the only injury or problem I had going into and coming out of Korea. It was a real big experience for me.
And how long did it take you to overcome the malaria?
Do what?
How long did it take you to overcome the malaria?
About a week.
Mm-hmm.
That's how fast it. And I've never had a reoccurrence. A lot of people have reoccurrences, but I haven't had any, and I'm thankful for that because it's a pretty serious disease, disease. And my military career continued, and I went back to where I came in at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, at a replacement center there, and had a brother, as I said, in the military police. So I decided one day at Fort Benning that I wanted to become a military policeman, and I did that at Fort Benning. And it was good because I learned to ride a motorcycle, and that's where I began my life with a motorcycle, and have been doing it since, as a matter of fact. And basically following that, I ended up back in Japan in the military police, and got involved in the Masonic order and over there, and it was very refreshing to me to get that and participate in it in Japan, and see the people how they received it. And they did have active Masonic lodges in Japanese, and I was able to attend some. At that point, we weren't getting any promotions, and I made E6, which is Sergeant First Class, and I felt it was absolutely zero. I had no advanced capability because since then they came out with the Sergeant Major E8 and E9, but back then Sergeant First Class is E6 was as high as I could make it. So I decided I would attempt to go to OCS. So I contacted the company commander, and he thought it was a good idea too. So I said, "Where we go?" And things like my age hadn't bothered me before, but in order to go through that school, I might add, I missed a part here that I need to mention, and that was a part in the early 50s when I was assigned to Eniwetok Atoll, and the purpose for that was for security of the nuclear bomb blast and the hydrogen bomb, which was first one was detonated in that area. We operated out of Eniwetok, but most of the detonations were done in Bikini Atoll, and so I got to witness and participate in a lot of those. And basically, my job was to make sure that the island was clear of all personnel and equipment that needed to be evacuated before the blast occurred. And I did that. And we operated off a troop transport that was anchored offshore.
Yeah, this is in Japan.
No, this is after Japan, and coming back to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, going to military police, and that's why I got involved in the security side. But that job required the top security level that people could get. And my age problem had not been a problem, and was not a problem during that, because they conducted their investigations, and I received a clearance and was assigned to Eniwetok, and it was a good career for me. It's kind of like a Hawaii type environment, but it's very boring because the only people there are soldiers, men. There are no families and that kind of thing there. All of it had been evacuated years before, I guess. But it was a good experience for me as a learning curve. Again, my learning curve, rather than being at 20 to 30 degrees, it jumped straight up to almost to 90 degrees, in order to capture all the information and things that I was exposed to. But it was a good experience for me. But after completing all that and being assigned back in the military police and a second tour back in Japan, that's when the decision was made that I would try to go to Infantry Officers Candidate School. did that and graduated in mid or late '59, and I received a gold bar as a commissioned second lieutenant, and that caused some other things to happen, like the education I didn't have. Now education was focused big time, and so I started after hours courses with the university there in Columbia, South Carolina, and it continued. I ended up with, considering all those studies, I ended up with a 3-year equivalency of college education. And for some reason, when I got back, I decided that I planned to go ahead and finish the degree. And actually, I wish I had, but I didn't. So I just continued and haven't had a successful career. And I retired as a major, senior officer major, in 1970. And I was still a reasonably young man at that time.
Yeah. Now, when you finished up, you came back to to South Carolina. When did the Korean conflict? I mean, that was the end of the Korean. But when did Vietnam? And you got engaged in Vietnam too.
Yes, I did. And this started in the early '60s, and that was when President Kennedy organized the Special Forces units called Green Berets.
Mm-hmm.
So being gung-ho and aggressive, my goal was to get into that, and I did. And I was deployed from there to Vietnam, again, for the first tour, being a Green Beret. And a Green Beret, your goal as an officer is to be a A-team leader. Well, that's normally a captain. But at that point, I was only a first lieutenant, and my friend and I, we were selected. One of us, Billy Hatfield, or myself, had to go with the Special Forces Advance Party to Saigon, Vietnam. And the reason for that is he and I were the only two French linguists in the group, and they felt that one of us had to go. So we literally flipped a coin, or we didn't. The group commander flipped a coin to see who was going and who was going to stay back and go with an A team, and either won or lost, or which way you want to look at it. I think it was a win for me, hindsight, meaning that as this career continued, I served that one, and my friend Billy Hatfield from Alabama, he and I went through OCS together and graduated at the same time. We were very close friends. And as I came back to the United States from Vietnam, I went to the Officers Advance course at Fort Benning, and who in the world, Billy Hatfield was there also in the same class again. The problem was I had completed my permanent change of station requirement of 12 months in Vietnam, and he hadn't, because there's a Special Force A team, and I did bring him into the country and insert him into a remote location with an A team. But the reason I say win or lose on this flip of the coin, when he left the advanced course, going back for his permanent change of station over in Vietnam, he lived probably about 2 months, and he was killed in an ambush. So that go back to that win, flip of the coin, which way it was. And hindsight tells me I probably won, because I could very easily have been in the position he was in.
And he was in a Vietnam battle when this occurred.
Ambush.
Ambush.
Yeah, an ambush is pretty heavy thing to be involved in.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's got a killing zone, and that means that everything in that killing zone is covered by either small arms or support artillery or mines or booby traps, whatever. It's successful in probably less than a minute. If it's a success or failure in a minute's time, that's how fast all this stuff occurs when you get involved in it. I did not get involved in an ambush, but he did, and he didn't make it. I taught it for a year or so down at Fort Bragg, but we were all trained for it, knew what we were supposed to do, and that sort of thing.
And how many tours of duty did you have in Vietnam?
I had 2 tours.
And how much time between the tours did you have?
Probably about a year. That's an estimate. I don't remember exact dates, but it was about a year. And I had no problem going back the second time, but it's always tough on your wife and your family when they leave like that. And I did have another little interruption of a trip with the 82nd Airborne Division to the Dominican Republic, and that was a combat operation also. And we took a lot of casualties there, about 20 or 25 killed. But it was a successful mission. Our mission was to establish a line of communication from the San Ysidro Airport to the American Embassy. And we split the forces on both sides. They split the 2 groups that were opposing each other. And that basically terminated that confrontation, but it did not do it because they were still making trouble for each other. So both of them at least one of them was taken out of the country by force to get him removed. And while I was there, my company was stationed in a compound, or they had an armored compound. Armored meaning tanks and this sort of thing. And our mission was to keep them in that compound and not allow them to leave. And I was detailed with that task. We were successful because they cranked them up. We thought they were going, but they didn't. They didn't go. So then I came back to the United States from that, and basically ended my airborne Green Beret career at that point. Why? Because it's called, when you become an officer, you have to have a development skills where you get involved in several functions to better train you for the future. And I might point out that was my first exposure in college to psychology courses, and I just remember them so well, and I've been thankful for having taken those courses, because there's still a lot of people that think the military, you do something because you're told to do it. No repercussions at all, and that's not so. Because when you're actually caught in an ambush, the odds of you getting out of that are about 0 if the ambush is set up properly. And the only way to get out of it is to go at the gunfire. And that makes it pretty difficult to do for anybody. And it takes more than somebody just you're telling somebody to get up and go. They got to have a more meaningful purpose behind it. Meaning duty, this is MacArthur speaking, duty, honor, country, that sort of thing. Motivation. I'm doing it because I want to be the best, that sort of thing. Anything to motivate them to do it. And my psychology training and education helped me immensely in all those functions. And I carried on into civilian life too.
Absolutely.
But I retired in March of 1970 after what I consider a very enjoyable, a very successful military career. It was very good for me. It trained me in a lot of areas, not only scholastic education, but how to deal with people and how to encourage them to perform without just saying, go do it because I'm the boss. That don't work. It doesn't work anywhere, in business or any other location. And when I got out, when I retired, I was at loss as to what I was going to be doing. I'm thinking, what can an airborne Green Beret officer do in civilian life?
When you were 40?
36.
36. That's yeah.
And why did I want to get out? I was in line for promotion to lieutenant colonel. I was going into primary promotion order that year, and I declined it. And went ahead and took an early out. But I was serving a 2-year assignment above 20, and that meant that normally you'd have to come out at 20, but I was proud to say I was selected to stay on the extension of an additional 2 years, of which I completed 1, and then Vietnam and everything was phasing down, so I just decided it was time for me to go ahead and seek other purposes in life. And so I got out and became involved in transportation. What a career that was for me.